Hi, I'm Aidan Brown, and this is the Main Stage podcast. Welcome. We're joined today by David Ansara from the Free Market Foundation. Welcome, David.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here, Aidan. Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you. Just to make a very brief introduction, you, as far as I'm concerned, are an expert in markets, many aspects of markets, and in particular, free markets or legislation and of freeing overall markets. And for me, that is a huge problem that South Africa has at the moment. I personally believe that we've gone through a stage over the last, especially 2 decades, where our rights have been eroded. We're less free now than we were. And I think that the economic conditions have aligned with this. We now have a generation of young South Africans, people that are basically head towards 30, that have never lived in a country, that have never experienced a growing market, a growing economy. They've never experienced the prosperity, comfort, and joy that basically comes with an economy that's growing. Do you think that there's some merit to this argument, or that it's difficult to draw these correlations?
Yeah, Aidan, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, I think first off to say is that free markets, where people are left to their own devices to pursue their idea of the good life, to make profit, to engage in commerce, it is shown throughout history and in various countries around the world that that produces incredible prosperity and human flourishing. So when we talk about free markets, we're actually talking about people and their ability to create that good life for themselves. And in South Africa, I think we have a bit of a mixed picture, because post-1994, in the economic sense as well as socially, there was an incredible amount of liberalization. When I was growing up in the 1980s, there were a lot of restrictions on trade, and obviously there was the sanctions regime. But, you know, whenever my father went on a business trip overseas, he would come back with some Toblerone that you couldn't get in the Sava chocolate back in South Africa. And so in the 90s, there was this massive opening up of South Africa to the world. We were considered this pariah state during the apartheid era, and suddenly we had this influx of tourists, of foreign capital and businesses, and that really produced a big bump in terms of the living conditions, the investment appetite for the business community itself. And so maybe a slight correction on what you were saying, there are almost two halves to the story. So post-94, there was this massive opening up, and under the Mbeki administration, there was relative fiscal prudence, macroeconomic stability, independence of the South African Reserve Bank. I've got some qualms about the SARB as an entity in general, as many libertarians might have. But, you know, there was a sense of that monetary policy, fiscal policy would be geared towards creating growth, the gear policy, as it was called. And that was what the left of the ANC tripartite alliance called the 1996 class project, which really animated the communists and the trade unionists to form this so-called coalition of the wounded and rally around Jacob Zuma, who was elected to the leadership of the ANC in 2007 at the Polokwane conference. And then that then precipitated the exit of Thabo Mbeki, and that dovetailed, very unfortunately, with the global financial crisis, which had huge economic repercussions, not just in South Africa, but around the world. And actually, South Africa's institutions were fairly insulated. The banks, for example, were not as highly leveraged domestically as they were in other parts of the world, like in the States and in Europe and the UK. And so those twin effects, the ushering in of the so-called state capture project, the ascendancy also of the SACP and COSATU to key portfolios in the economic ministries like Department of Trade and Industry, for example, Rob Davies, Ibrahim Patel later, you know, created a much more statist orientation of policy, much more interventionist, much more highly regulated. And that trend really continued, if not accelerated, under Ramaphosa, despite
absolutely.
a lot of the hype that he was supposedly going to be this reformer. And in some respects, you could even look at the Zuma period, although there was a lot of naked patronage politics and enrichment, think of Nkandla, a lot of the more extreme radical policies like expropriation without compensation, national health insurance, didn't really gain that much traction during Zuma's presidency. And then under Mr. Ramaphosa's presidency, those have suddenly accelerated. And here we sit with some of these on the statute books. So that's kind of a high-level picture. So I wouldn't say it's all doom and gloom. And freedom, I think, is unevenly enjoyed in various different domains in South Africa. And so something like this podcast, for example, that's us exercising our free speech rights.
Which free for now, although the government is trying to come for us.
Yes, and I think an important point is that your freedom is intrinsic to who you are as a person. And it's not contingent on the government granting you the rights.
Yes.
So we have this thing called the Constitution, which is this document that enshrines certain rights in our law and which is supposedly supreme.
Yes.
But really that is the articulation of underlying fundamental rights. So your right of ownership to own and dispose of property as you see fit, your right to engage in commerce, your right to express yourself, to associate with other people, whether it be in a political party or some kind of civic movement, your academic freedom in a university setting, your ability to inquire and delve into and research different problems, and even if your research creates discomfort or controversy or something like that. So this is really a bundle of rights, and it's not a buffet that you choose from. They kind of come as a full package, and this goes back many centuries to the origins of the liberal political tradition, which my organization, the Free Market Foundation, espouses.
To go back, yes, things did accelerate under Ramaphosa's leadership, and I think we were completely fooled by Ramaphosa. He was touted as the guy that was going to be for free markets and that was going to be anti-corruption, and he kind of came on with that clean image like he was being parachuted in from the outside of politics. And in hindsight, it's a completely ridiculous thing to assume that Ramaphosa was going to be Mr. Clean. First of all, he was head of cadre deployment under Jacob Zuma. He had a long time to cook inside that environment, and he was the guy that for 8 years was deploying all the corrupt people in all the places that they wanted to usurp control. And not only that, but within his era, he went on to protect the people that he deployed and promoted them where possible. So when I look back now, for me, Ramaphosa, in many ways, is ominous of ANC's communist agenda, where he was packaged as a free market guy on the outside, but all the while he had this communist agenda, him and his cronies, and in some ways that aligns with what Dr. Anthea Jeffries has said based on her research. Edwin Cameron, the constitutional judge, said to me that he thinks Anthea's take on this is alarmist. That was the word that he used. I don't think it is alarmist. I must say, to a large extent, I agree with Anthea. That this is clearly what the ANC has done. I was wondering what your view is on this.
Yeah, so I watched that interview that you did with Justice Cameron. I thought it was quite a while ago, so forgive me if I don't get all the details right. I think just for the benefit of your audience, Anthea Jeffrey, she's head of policy research at the Institute of Race Relations. So she and I are former colleagues and still very much in contact today. And I've done a few interviews like this one with her at our offices at Northwood's house in Parktown. And so Anthea's thesis is best represented in her book, Countdown to Socialism. And she really delves deeply into the idea of the National Democratic Revolution, the NDR, which is the guiding stated philosophy and aims and strategic mission of the African National Congress. And this is very well documented in the ANC's own policy documents.
They just renewed their vigor for it now recently.
Yeah. And that goes all the way back to the 1969 Morogoro Conference in Tanzania. ANC was in exile at the time, where the ANC specifically committed itself to a socialist agenda. This was part of Cold War politics, part of the influence of the South African Communist Party, which, although small, has had an outsized intellectual influence over the ANC. The SACP remains in the tripartite alliance to this day. And there's even been moments where they've thought, should we contest elections at the local level? I think there have even been, I think it was Metsimaholo, where
they failed hopelessly, but they tried.
Yes. But interestingly enough, and I think this is revealing, even though there's, by their own admission, the SACP's own admission, that there is not sufficient electoral support for the SACP, their conclusion was, well, that doesn't really matter because there are different pathways to power that we can pursue, which I think illustrates, and this is something in the EFF's policy documents as well, that they're not necessarily limited to parliamentary democratic processes. They would even be prepared to seize power violently or use some other kind of coercive mechanism if needs be to attain and withhold power. So I think that's very important. And really the core of the NDR is one of centralization.
Yes.
Of basically that there is a political vanguard, and this is a Leninist idea, that the vanguard leads the revolution. It's not sufficient to do what Marx suggested, which is kind of wait for the wheels of history to turn, and there will be this kind of Hegelian dialectic, and through class conflict, a new communist society will emerge. Lenin basically said, well, no, you actually have to make it happen. He was operating in the context of Russia, Tsarist Russia, which was essentially an agrarian kind of system. There was no real proletariat or working class of any significant scale in Russia in the early 20th century. But he said, well, actually, it is the task of the intellectual political elite to foment and catalyze the revolution.
Yes.
And that Marxist-Leninist idea is really carried through to SACP and ANC thinking throughout the 20th century. And so this expressed itself in different ways. There was always a very small cadre of political leaders that would kind of set ANC policy. And even though it was supposedly a mass-based movement, really there were a few key figures who would determine major policy decisions. And when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, the global arithmetic of power altered fundamentally, and the backing that the ANC had enjoyed from the Soviet Union throughout those decades in exile, training and arms and so on, that evaporated overnight. And so the impetus towards negotiation was a lot stronger. F.W. de Klerk surprised everybody in February 1990, announcing the unbanning of these liberation movements, the ANC, the PAC, and others. And that set in motion a chain of events that led to the negotiated transition. But the ANC always had a view of embracing constitutional democracy as a short-term tactic.
Yes.
But the revolution continues, a luta continua.
Yes.
And that is not the objective. That is a means to the greater, longer-term objective. So I think there are various ways in which the NDR manifests, and every chapter of Anthea's book, I think, is pretty persuasive. She looks at different domains in the economy and society. So whether it's the capture of the judiciary, we can unpack that a little bit more, the capture of the state itself. So we spoke earlier about Jacob Zuma's state capture project, but in many respects he refined that process, and the policy of cadre deployment is really a very explicit pillar of the NDR. It's not an anomaly. It's very very clear that unlike a kind of liberal democratic conception of the state, where the state is like this neutral set of institutions that are governed by rules and processes and sort of act impartially, and then you have political interests competing for control of the state. through elections or whatever the case may be. This conception is totally different. It's like, well, the state is an instrument of power that we need to capture and then utilize for the furtherance of the revolution.
Yes.
And so something like the SABC is an instrument to communicate and to disseminate the ideas of the revolution. Or South African Airways, it's not just about commuting passengers around the country or around the world.
Yes.
It's a source of revenue for the party and for the movement. And that's why you see a lot of these state-owned entities that, I mean, I'm not a state-owned kind of guy. I don't think we should have many public entities.
Yeah, I mean, we've got hundreds of them. There's 400 or something. I don't even know. Most people can only name 5. But
Yeah. And but I mean, if you think of somebody like Hendrik van der Bijl, I mean, he was a brilliant scientist, and he developed ISCOR and ESCOM, and these were these big kind of centralized behemoths, these state entities, but they kind of worked better than they do now, a lot of these entities. And that's because of the rent seeking, the extraction
of course
that has happened there. But that's by design. It's a feature, not a bug.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The ANC has actually been remarkably successful at the cargo deployment method straight out of the KGB handbook, and the creation of a fortifying oligarch class around the political elite, in my opinion, also straight out of the KGB handbook. And I think they've actually done quite well to play this game and establish these networks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important term that you used, oligarchy.
Yes, we have a South African oligarch class. There's absolutely no doubt about it. For me, the 100 people that is referred to by Professor William Gumede as having received R1 trillion in BEE, while nobody else was uplifted, those are oligarchs. There's no other way to call it. The ANC has done extremely well in the last couple of years to do that. And not only that, but they're also now, to side note, they are now also deploying lobbyists. The first one I saw was Dr. Nicholas Crisp with NHI, where they found somebody that was of revenant power, and they made people believe that he was this honest doctor that was out for the good of public health, not realizing that this was a paid a lobbyist, and he would sell snake oil if that was the only product. And this is going to be extremely unpopular. Wandile Seshlobo, in my opinion, is also an example of another lobbyist. Brought in as an agricultural expert, definitely an expert in his field, now talking about transformation policy. And between these lobbyists and these forceful radical policies like EWC and NHI, and the creation of an oligarch class, the ANC political elite has actually fortified themselves quite well.
I think that this is a very important point that you raised there. And something like Black economic empowerment is dressed up as a policy of redress and correcting historical injustices, but actually very much is the blueprint for the creation of this oligarchic class.
Yes, absolutely.
And you may recall who was the first chair of the BEE Commission.
I don't recall.
Well, it was Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa.
I didn't. Okay.
Yeah, and one of the early beneficiaries and one of the most richest beneficiaries of the program. So it's no surprise that he's very wedded.
Of course, and that's why I reject Patrice Motsepe as a legitimate candidate for presidency of the country. He's cut of the same cloth, massive benefactor of BEE, and he is going to come in and protect the oligarch class that fortify him. He's part of that class, I suppose, to some extent, and he's going to, if he joins the ANC and aligns with them, he's going to do that thing where you put the party before the country.
Explain a bit more. So, I mean, he's not somebody, unlike Cyril Ramaphosa, who spent a lot of time in the ANC. Do you think he might be absorbed by the ANC Borg?
Absolutely. I don't think that he is going to be able to sway the ANC from its culture. I think that the ANC is so heavily entrenched in patronage networks, in Marxist, Leninist policies, that he actually won't have the power. At best, he would be entering a breaking organization with a waning popularity, And for me, why would he even want to do it in the first place? He's not like Cyril Ramaphosa, who's being parachuted into the super popular position, where the ANC is still doing amazingly and money's flowing and things are looking good. For me, it would just tank his reputation. But again, to go back, I don't think that the ANC would be able to deploy a guy like Matjiu to rescue them. He's cut of that same cloth. He's going to protect the patronage networks. He's going to protect black economic empowerment.
So I think something very important, and it does frustrate me a bit, that in many respects in South Africa we fixate on personalities.
Yes.
I mean, I'm a individualist. I believe that personalities shape events, and I think that's important. But I think what you're getting at is really what is the underlying systemic issue here, and the web of interests that uphold this current system.
Yes.
Because, I mean, anybody with two eyes can see that BE is not working, that it's only benefiting a very narrow elite. And yet here we sit with the policy still on the statute books. I am somewhat encouraged to see the DA proposing their alternative economic inclusion for all bill. I think that's an important development. For it to be more than just a gesture, I think it needs to be actively introduced as a bargaining chip in the GNU politics. But just getting back to my point, I think there's always this idea that there's going to be some white knight that's going to come on his horse and save the ANC from itself. But the ANC is wired in a certain way. It is infused with this ideology of socialism, of state control.
Yes.
And even with a benign, benevolent person coming in, I'm not commenting either way on Patrice Motsepe's candidacy, which may or may not happen, you would still be subject to those same interests and those same forces. And it's, I don't think it's clear to me that anybody can really undo that. And I mean, if you think of the ANC's own internal financial affairs, which it goes to the brink of financial ruin, and then says nice things about Hamas and the Islamic Republic, and then suddenly its coffers are miraculously restored to good health.
Yes, ANC's sold South Africa's social and economic freedom in order to bail itself out of its own self-made financial problems. They sold democracy. That's how I feel to some extent, to bail themselves out of spending too much money on fancy parties, basically. Yeah.
So I think that there's that consumption element, like just enriching yourself, living in a fancy house and driving an expensive vehicle. But there's also, and this goes back to that debate about the NDR, is that there's no sense of, okay, we're acting in some kind of broader public interest or civic duty. It's really about how do we maintain our hold on power, perpetuate the revolution, control various domains of society. And in many respects, it is a totalizing philosophy. You could even say totalitarian, that there should be no domain in South Africa, in society, that is not in some ways controlled by the political elite, by those in power. And you can look at any domain, and whether that's education. This must be state-controlled, according to the vision of the ANC.
Particularly education.
And what is driving something like the Bella Act?
Yes.
That is an antipathy towards minorities and Afrikaners in particular.
Yes.
And there's a lot of, commentary about, we want to encourage indigenous mother tongue language instruction in South Africa. This is a diverse country, and we should have mother tongue instruction because this is beneficial. But then Afrikaans schools that are perfectly well run by the school governing bodies, they're the target of the ire. When you look at the media, I think there's a credible case to be made that a lot of the mainstream established media are at the very least, swimming in the ideological slipstream of
Yes.
the ANC, if not outright captured by elements of the ANC.
Definitely, I consider many of them to be just mouthpieces of the ANC now. And again, I know that it's not a popular thing to say, but
depends who's hearing it. And so I mean, I think this is an interesting illustration of the tension between freedom-loving South Africans and the centralizing statist political elite, because we have this flourishing alternative media landscape in South Africa, not just this podcast, but a whole host of others. And you don't need necessarily the fanciest equipment. You can do something on your phone, and that's your broadcast medium.
Absolutely.
So in many respects, that's dramatically opened up the space for the contestation of ideas.
Yeah.
But then you also have the kind of corporate news system, which is very much beholden to power. And so there's that tension point there.
Yes.
And then, I think when you look at the judiciary, I mean, that's a very interesting case to explore, because in many respects you have examples of, like with the Nkandla judgment,
yes,
the Constitutional Court coming out against President Jacob Zuma. But then on the other hand, you have the Constitutional Court refusing to hear the Kill the Boer matter on appeal after the AfriForum case against Julius Malema was defeated at the Supreme Court of Appeal. Actually, incidentally, the Free Market Foundation's Rule of Law project was a friend of the court in that case at the Supreme Court of Appeal. Advocate Mark Oppenheimer was our counsel for that.
Yes.
And so, many people rightly asked, like, why does the Constitutional Court not even hear this matter, let alone adjudicate against it? They said, there's nothing to see here. We're not even going to. I think that, to borrow an expression from Justice Cameron, was anomalous.
Yes.
And here you have the court coming down hard against the old South African flag, which is actually a historical emblem figure from 1927. People call it the apartheid flag, but it preceded apartheid. And that supposedly is hate speech. And as Cameron rightly pointed out, the Concord doesn't even hear the Kill the Boer matter. And he says foreign visitors that I host here think that I explained that this is anomalous, but I think he's been quite polite.
Yes, Justice Edwin Cameron, in a very fancy set of legalese, basically said that he finds it very difficult to understand how shoot the Boer is allowed, but the old South African flag is disallowed. There was a clip where he said that I had to eventually turn off the comments when people went mad.
No, I mustn't turn off the comments. The comments where all the action is.
Yeah, and things get quite violent in the comment section. I don't go in there anymore. But to go back to take one step back to education, I think the ANC has done extremely well. You were talking about the political intellectuals and the way that Marxist-Leninists want those intellectuals to push the ideas of Marxism and Leninism. And what has happened is they have done extremely well. The ANC has done extremely well to use educational systems, universities, to push Marxist and Leninist ideologies. And people think that I am a conspiracy theorist of sorts. But when you go into South African universities, the narrative within these universities is overwhelmingly Marxist-Leninist. And that is the way that most of the lecturers lean. It's very, very curriculum heavy. And it's only if you go to the sciences do you find that there's an entire absence of these narratives. And at the same time the ANC's done this, they've also destroyed the emerging middle class of people that would be bricklayers and plumbers and construction people, by killing the technicons. And instead of having this generation of free-thinking people that are apolitical, that go about running their business as entrepreneurs, you've got a class of unemployed be a Marxist-Leninist graduates who go out and they have very loud, amplified voices in society, especially now with the power of social media. And all of this has taken place at the exact same time that ANC's internal intellectual decline has taken place. There was a time when ANC was filled with people that were trained in the law, like Mandela.
Kara Asmal.
Yeah, economists like Thabo Mbeki. And what has happened now is the ANC is entirely intellectually bereft. It's full almost entirely with fools and idiots, maybe a couple of people peppered in there that are well educated, and there'll be medical doctors who will steal from sick patients. And this decline of the intellect within the ANC has stopped people from emerging, leaders from emerging that understand modern economics, that understand modern trade theory, that understand modern business competition. And I believe that if there were just a few people in the ANC that were more academically up to merit for their positions, that the ANC wouldn't be, on such a Marxist-Leninist leaning paradigm.
So I think the problems in education are well described by Professor Koos Malan, who's used the term the state departmentalization of education. And this relates to what we were talking about earlier, around the state having control and dominion over so many different aspects of society. And so I'm a council member at the University of Cape Town.
Yes.
And I was elected in 2024 as part of representative of alumni, or on behalf of alumni. And the council comprises 30 members, which I think is quite a lot. There are 4 council members who are elected by alumni. And then there's donors and academic staff and support staff. But there are no less than 5 representatives of the Department of Higher Education and Training, which dramatically affects the voting decisions that are made at that council, right? Around the curriculum, around the finances, around its foreign affairs. More recently, there was a so-called Gaza motion, which essentially compels the university staff to have no dealings whatsoever with anybody who is connected with the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, which essentially means any Israeli. And I've been very critical of this. I've voted against this resolution, which we lost narrowly by 1 vote in the council. And we don't know who votes exactly in what way, but I'm willing to say that the presence of 5 higher education department representatives that does kind of sway the outcomes. I should say that I am not representing the views of the university in this conversation. I'm just speaking to my own experience. And, that has consequences for the institution and for the student body there and for the staff there. And so generally, I think we should be looking a lot more critically at the areas in which the state involves itself. And in many respects, that development is a fairly new one, that you have such high representation from the state. It's actually a consequence of fees must fall, because suddenly everyone was concerned about the plight of students and how much they have to pay, and all this ideological dogma around decolonization and burning of artworks and campuses on fire. And now suddenly it's like, oh, we need to do something. Let's get the state involved. And that is the big mistake that you make. That is very hard to reverse later on down the line.
Yes.
So in my work, I'm trying to encourage people to move away from this reflex of saying, like, the government must do X, Y, Z.
Yes.
Because often when you do that, you invite the government into a domain that should be a private domain.
Yes.
I mean, something like universities, if you go back 800 years to the origins of Oxford and Cambridge, and you look at the old Ivy League universities in the United States, these were independent organizations. They had their own authority, their own rules, their own traditions and norms.
Yes.
And gradually, creepingly, the state has involved itself more and more. You've also seen this expansion of the administrative side of the universities, which has dramatically risen the costs.
Yeah, the rise of the managerial university. It's almost a standard thing now to have a bloated middle management in state institutions where you don't need them, where you need more lecturers and less bureaucratic middle managers. They'll do exactly the opposite in South Africa, guaranteed.
Yeah, I mean, you started this conversation by saying you speak with experts, but expertise is garnered in very different ways. You don't necessarily have to go to university.
No.
I mean, you spoke about the trades, the TVET colleges. I'm led to believe, I did some research on this a few years ago, that there are mechanics courses that you can do at a TVET college. But the car that you're working on to demonstrate, do your practical exams and things is like a 30-year-old car that nobody drives anymore.
Yes.
Whereas if you had an internship at a motor mechanics shop and got your hands dirty and full of grease, sooner or later you're going to learn how to fix a car, right? Like, does your barber have a certification to cut your hair? I mean,
yes,
there's a market mechanism. If he gives you too many bad haircuts, you're going to stop going to him. So he's got a strong incentive to give you a good haircut.
Yes, of course.
I commend your barber. He's obviously very good. But, I think one of the features of the contemporary age is that we sort of expect like university is the pathway to success.
Yes.
I mean, I'm very proud of my master's in politics that I got, but I've learned a lot of other things since then. I used to work with an economist named Ian Cruikshanks, whose name you might remember. At one point, like in the 90s and the 2000s, if there was ever any economic event, like a rise in interest rates or the jobs numbers or whatever, there was Ian Cruikshanks on your television speaking with a lot of authority about.
Yes.
He also spent the last years of his career at the Institute of Race Relations. And I would often talk to Ian, and he told me that he went to the University of Life. He didn't study. Yes. I mean, and where did he learn about markets? On the trading floor of the JSE in the old JSE building downtown.
Yes.
I think on Diagonal Street. And that was, there in the bull pit, really learning about what moved markets, how to identify valuable companies, developing that instinct for trade. He then went on to work at Nedbank, was forcibly retired at 60 because that was their policy. But I mean, somebody like Ian Cruikshanks is a really great demonstration of like, if you have curiosity, if you have an appetite for something, you can go and do it. I mean, obviously, for certain trades, you kind of need certain level of qualification, but even lawyers, that used to be a profession governed thing. So if you think of the Legal Practices Act, that's a good example of the state now sinking its claws into the legal profession.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And saying, no, the government's going to give you your credentials and your qualifications. Oh, and lo and behold, you need to meet these transformation criteria in order to, satisfy our conditions.
Yes.
And so now that's how politics starts to infect and pollute other domains in the private sphere.
There's a number of ways that you can grow and develop expertise. I'm not arguing with that at all. But what the ANC's done is they've basically come in and said at almost every turn that there is always a politician that is more of an expert in any given thing. For example, policing, Minister of Police never having walked the beat, never having gone to police colleges. These are politicians, career politicians, and to deploy these people in to say that they know more than people that have built up expertise over a lifetime, I think is complete insanity. It's complete arrogance. It's just political arrogance. And we keep seeing that time and time again in almost every space. The ANC has definitely centralized and tightened control, and they've done quite well to do this. One of the things that has become a very hot point of contention is built around Dr. van Staden's research into just the number of race laws that has grown in South Africa. And at one stage, there was a huge argument. I know people like Ernst Ruth have been called argent provocateurs by guys like Jeff Wex by going overseas and saying that we have
telling the truth.
These race laws. And at one stage it was in contention. We weren't actually sure whether or not he was right. But we now have proper academic research to show that the number of race laws in South Africa has actually increased. We were a freer country. There were less race laws, 25 odd years ago. And every year since then, we've had more and more race regulations in South Africa, to a point now where there's actually more race laws now in South Africa than there was at the height of the apartheid era. I'm not talking about the severity and the qualitative aspect of the race laws, just the sheer number of race laws. It's now impossible to argue. There are now more race laws in South Africa than there was at the height of the apartheid era.
Yeah, so Dr. van Staden is Martin van Staden, my colleague, who is
not
our head
the
of
fighter, not the EFC fighter.
Yeah, no, if you try and Google Martin van Staden.
Yeah, if you try and Google Martin van Staden, it's not the EFC Martin van Staden.
Yes, but Dr. Martin van Staden, my colleague, head of policy at the Free Market Foundation, is just as combative.
Yes.
His tools are his fingers and his keyboard, and his voice. But, Martin recently was awarded a doctorate in law from the University of Pretoria. I was very proud to attend his graduation ceremony. And his thesis looked at this idea of transformative constitutionalism and the myth of it, the fallacy of it. He's a strong adherent of the rule of law, of constitutionalism broadly. It needs no caveat. And transformation, actually, the word transformation doesn't appear in the Constitution, but often we're told that there's this transformational imperative.
Yes.
But that's a political imperative, actually. And we were talking about the Kill the Boer case, how in many respects the judiciary, whilst nominally independent, still an organ of state, still subject to political forces and pressures. There's the Judicial Services Commission, which elects judges, which is staffed mostly by politicians.
Yes.
So you may have seen footage of Julius Malema reprimanding some eminent judge who's trying to apply to go to the Constitutional Court or something, somebody like David Ansara, a very accomplished jurist, having to prostrate himself before this thug.
I think they've declined massively in quality, the Constitutional Court bench, but that's a discussion for another time.
So all of that is to say, Martin is a very accomplished legal scholar, but he basically used his arithmetic skills to just go and look up and count the number of race laws. And like you say, some have more breadth and severity than others, but it's wherever there is some kind of racial provision. So some people might say, oh, well, what does the Weather Act have to do with race law? But there's some provision in that law that says maybe you need to have racial representativity on the board or something like that. So there are many ways in which racial criteria infuse themselves throughout our law. There's obviously the big laws, the BBBE Act, the Public Procurement Act, the Preferential Procurement Act, the Employment Equity Act, which specifically has racial quotas and targets around race, gender, and so on, that are enforceable by the state. So many people say, oh, you're being alarmist by pointing this out. No, it's just a bare fact. It is what it is. And, Martin doesn't make any qualitative assessments about good race laws or bad race laws. But I think something that's interesting that characterizes this debate is, and Martin points this out, this idea of the vibes. Apartheid race laws, those are very bad, like pencil tests and separate amenities like park benches and entrances and exits. But now we have good race laws because these are all in the name of redress and correcting historical wrongs. And I reject that. I mean, I think the best way to fight against discrimination, racial discrimination, this is, as Justice John Roberts said, from the United States, if you want to fight racial discrimination, you don't do it with more racial discrimination. You do it by eliminating racial discrimination and treating people as equals, afforded with the same rights and the same duties and responsibilities as everybody else. That doesn't mean that you're going to have equality of outcomes. Some people have different capacities, different capabilities, different appetites for risk. My capabilities and appetites for risk are far less than Elon Musk's, for example. I couldn't launch rockets into the sky and develop all the things that he's done. But everybody has a shot, and it's equality of permission. rather than equality of outcome.
Yeah, quality of opportunity is something that everyone wants to strive for in a decent country, but quality of outcome is actually just social engineering. It's been proven to never work. And not only that, but there is some inherent data to suggest that there's an underlying human pathology that resists that kind of social engineering, like they've had with the balance of opportunity in engineering among different sexes in Scandinavian countries. But again, that's, I suppose, a conversation for a different day.
Yeah, I mean, an analogy I often like to draw upon is running. So I'm quite an enthusiastic runner. I do a lot of training. I commit to it quite seriously. And when you arrive on the start line, you see people from all walks of life. I mean, South African running culture is amazing. I mean, if you go to a race, you'll see everybody there, different races, genders, ages.
Yes, very broadly accessible.
Yeah, you'll see the old bully there with his boop, and then there's the auntie there, and she's got a 65 on her back, and she's go running the race. And it's a great equalizer in a way, because you're all running the same route. Maybe there's some differentiation in what time you start because of the seedings, but basically you've got however many hours to finish the race. It's 42.2 kilometers, and you've got to get from here to the end.
Yes.
And it's kind of brutal in that sense. It's just like you either can do it or you can't, and whoever's fastest wins. And so everybody is entitled to have that shot. If you over a certain age, and you can go and run the race, but you have to put in the work. You have to do the training. And also you could train every day of your life and still not win the race. Like, there's just some Kenyan guy, some freak of nature, who, has been running since he was a fetus, and he's going to beat you. And it's kind of unfair, I mean, recently at the London Marathon, there were not one but two runners who ran a sub 2 hour marathon. That's never happened before under race conditions.
My friend Andrew Dollenberg, if you're listening, remember you said no one would ever run a 2 hour marathon. Sorry.
Sorry for you, Andrew.
Yeah, sorry, Andrew.
But I mean, spare a thought for the guy who came second, who also ran a 1:59 marathon. And he came second. And by the way, that was his first marathon that he's ever run.
Yeah, I saw that.
So, how unfair is that? So life is a bit unfair, and inequality is part of life.
Yes.
Right. But I mean, I think if you look back through history and you see actually how much humanity has progressed, you kind of see inequality through a bit of a different lens.
Yes.
So in the 100 years ago, the early 20th century, within the lifetimes of our grandparents, basically, extreme poverty globally was about 90%. So the vast majority of the world lived on what would today be $1.25 per day, if you look at the World Bank measures of absolute poverty. But today, it's less than 10%.
Yes.
So there's been a complete flipping of that pyramid.
Yes.
There's still, obviously, billionaires, and Musk could one day become a trillionaire. But the substance of inequality, I think, is also different.
Yes.
If you look back on 18th century France, when Marie Antoinette was the Queen of France, and she lived in the Palace of Versailles, and your average French peasant would have had a much more miserable life. They could never have imagined the wealth.
Yes.
And by today's standards, actually, that inequality was even more extreme. But Marie Antoinette didn't have flushable toilets in the Palace of Versailles. She had to go outside to use the loo. And she didn't have air conditioning.
Yes.
And everybody was infested with lice and powdered their skin, because their skin invariably had lots of abrasions and rashes and things from not bathing frequently enough. And so if you look today, somebody like Jeff Bezos, he might have a private jet, and he might be able to rent out the whole of Venice for his wedding.
Yes.
But on the flight to his wedding, he probably was using an iPad that was the same as the iPad that you and I use to watch the same set of shows. So in terms of his financial worth, he's probably orders of magnitude wealthier than you and I. But our lifestyle is not actually hugely different. I mean, I live in quite an affluent suburb of Joburg. My apartment is a relatively modest apartment amidst these big mansions and everything. But it doesn't really impact my life negatively. I mean, I sometimes see the billionaires driving past in their Porsches, but what matters is my relative position to where I've come from.
Yes.
And my own family security, my own lifestyle. So I think in South Africa we get very caught up with inequality. First of all, I would say a lot of state-led policies actually exacerbate and entrench inequality, as we're talking about.
Yeah.
But equality of merit, of natural hierarchies of merit, people sometimes work harder or take more risks and are rewarded for that. There's nothing wrong with that, and we should actually celebrate those high achievers in our life, just like we celebrate the guys who run sub-2-hour marathons.
I'm absolutely astounded when I encounter, especially university students or even people that are adults that run big businesses and large organizations that claim to be Marxists, and to try and explain to these people that the world is an infinitely better place now than it was 100 years ago, than it was 500 years ago. No. And almost every single one of these improvements is down to free market capitalism. Free market capitalism is an absolutely horrible, terrible system. It's the worst, except for all the other systems. And
I disagree. I think it's a fantastic system.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's the worst argument. If I can play the devil's advocate to say it is a terrible system, let's say I'm arguing against you. But if you proposed it against all the other systems, I would much rather go with that terrible system than anything else. And that there's basically no one in the world that is trying to escape a democratic free market country to go to a communist country. I mean, to explain to these people that no one is ever crawling under the fence to get into North Korea, that you just don't see this kind of thing. And
I've actually been to the border of North and South Korea to a place called the Joint Security Area, the JSA. And it's quite a thing to behold, I must tell you, because first of all, you get escorted by a US military officer, because obviously there's about 60,000 US military personnel in South Korea. And you get told you must not gesticulate in any way.
Yes.
Or gesture at all to the other side. You're not allowed cameras or binoculars or even an umbrella, because that might be mistaken for a gun. And so you get taken there. And what's interesting is that what you see is a complete open courtyard.
Yes.
So theoretically, you could just go walk across to the North Korean side, and you see over on the other side, the cameras looking at you ominously, like something out of Orwell's 1984. And then these very tall, strapping North Korean soldiers with their kind of communist red hats on. And by the way, they choose the tallest among them to represent them on the front lines. And in the middle is this prefabricated hut, painted blue, like the colors of the United Nations, which is where whenever there's some kind of diplomatic crisis, they'll all go and meet in there. And we actually that day got to go and tour around. So the reason I was in Korea is because my brother, he lives in South Korea.
Okay.
He's an English teacher. And I mean, that's really interesting. You don't see people kind of risking their lives to flee to North Korea, but the opposite certainly does.
Yes, there's no innovation and strategy that takes place inside communist, socialist countries, despite what communists and socialists might tell you. Innovation is driven by free market enterprise. It's driven by individuals' ability to go out and use their own skills and their own resources and their own imagination to achieve something new, to make something new, to create something, and then to potentially profiteer off that.
People are much better at allocating capital, assessing risk, understanding market needs than central bureaucracies or central planners. It's just a fact of life. I mean, this is, I think it was von Mises who spoke about the information or the planning problem. And Friedrich Hayek as well wrote extensively about this, that even the most well-informed, technically capable bureaucrat or politician cannot begin to imagine the complex needs of a diverse society. I mean, the classic example I always give is the shoe planning committees in the Soviet Union.
Yes.
Where every year they'd have these smart actuaries crunching the numbers to determine how many shoes the population of the whole Soviet Union is going to need. And so, one year it'll be 11 million, and then the next is like 11.7 million or whatever. But there were always either shortages or surpluses.
Yes.
Because you cannot predict what people's appetites will be.
Yes.
Maybe the weather's a few degrees colder this winter than it was the last winter, and people need more rugged woolen boots or something, or leather boots. Maybe it's slightly warmer. But, I mean, you and I can go out after this conversation and go explore the shops of Johannesburg and find all manner of shoes, different sizes, different styles, different designs.
Yes.
And critics of free market capitalism say, well, not everyone can afford those shoes.
Yes.
But actually, if you look, even the poorest among us always wearing shoes, right?
Yes, someone will fill that gap.
Yeah. And, whereas if you think of some of the worst atrocities in human history, like the famines that followed the Great Leap Forward in communist China, I mean, you literally had tens of millions of people starving to death, engaging in cannibalism, and the entire bird population was almost wiped out because people were so desperate for food, stripping off bark from trees and cooking it as a broth and drinking that. So, and by the way, boiling their shoes, their leather shoes as well, to drink that. So, Amartya Sen, who I don't agree with everything he writes, but he's pointed out that free societies have never suffered from famines because there's none of that. Information can flow freely through a free market country.
Every time in history,
to meet those needs.
Every time in history, Marxists or Leninists have, or Marxist-Leninists, or whatever it is, have intervened in society with whatever radical engineering policy they have. It has almost always led to death and destruction on a widespread scale. And even subtle Marxist socialist engineering leads to death and destruction on a widespread scale. And I would use South Africa as an example, that we have absolutely killed certain markets in South Africa, like killing off the mining sector. We should be making piles of money in South Africa off very, very high gold prices right now. And instead, our gold mining industry is severely diminished from what it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, if you think South Africa has probably the richest mineral endowment in the world, but barring perhaps the DRC, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting, people talk about the wealth of the nation and that this needs to be some kind of public good. And but I mean, the DRC is a very good example. Like, just having a rich mineral endowment is no guarantee of wealth. I mean, maybe a small coterie of people have become extremely wealthy from that extraction. But it's what you do with it that counts. And yeah, I mean, it's easy to kind of get a bit despondent during conversations like this, like, look at all the damage that the ANC has wrought. But I should stress, like, there's no such thing as an irrecoverable situation.
No.
If you just release that handbrake, you can unlock an incredible amount of wealth. I mean, agriculture is another example. I mean, look at how much agriculture has flourished post-1994. I mean, we're a net exporter of food. We have a very dynamic commercial and family-owned farming industry. If you think of the members of the agricultural union, SAI, like, these are very dynamic family-owned businesses. And, we're globally competitive in that domain, and without any state support at all, and also being vilified as the source of all the country's problems and dealing with incredible amounts of violent crime in terms of farm murders and attacks. So, I mean, it shows you what's possible.
Yes.
But it doesn't happen automatically. And if you relinquish control to nefarious political actors, you're going to kill that golden goose.
We can turn South Africa around fairly quickly. I fundamentally believe that. If I went to people in 1995 or the early 2000s in Sea Point, Cape Town, inner city bowl with all the drug dealers and whatever else was going on, and I said in 10 years' time, this place could be cleaned up, property markets will be going up, Property renters will be back. Tourists will be back. It'll look amazing. People
I lived in Sea Point in
Yeah.
the early 2000s, and it was not exactly a pleasant place.
And look, I mean, that's happened largely in 10 or 15 years. That's been turned around. And what the government does, the ANC-led government does, is they keep trying to cut up the same small, tiny little economic pie and redistribute it over and over again.
You can't redistribute your way to wealth.
We've run out of room. The only way that we are going to uplift young South Africans, and that includes obviously young, black, previously disadvantaged South Africans, if you want to use that term, is to grow the economy. And we need 3.5%-4% at a minimum in order to start putting a meaningful dent in unemployment. We're currently shedding 500,000 jobs, or 600,000 jobs shed was the last statistic. If just a small fraction of those 600,000 people turn to violent crime, you've got 6,000 more violent criminals on the street.
Interestingly enough, the Free Market Foundation has a great policy suggestion for dealing with our unemployment crisis. Do you want to hear it?
Yeah.
It's called the Job Seekers Exemption Certificate.
Yes, you can earn below minimum wage.
Yeah, so it basically, if this were to be adopted, it would enable job seekers to voluntarily exempt themselves from the whole raft of restrictive labor laws that are in place in South Africa. So the national minimum wage is one, which sets floors on, minimum amounts for wages, which effectively says to an unemployed person, you are not allowed to work for a rate below what we deem acceptable. This is what underpins the national minimum wage. But there are other laws like the Labour Relations Act, which gives a lot of power to trade unions, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, many others. The Employment Equity Act is another one. That all of this restricts and limits the appetite of employers to hire in the first place, because now you've got a business, this is your life's work. If you bring in some employee and he's a delinquent and he's not doing very well, it's going to be very difficult to get rid of him further on down the line. So that's really inhibiting of job creation. And so the Job Seekers Exemption Certificate would empower young people in particular to say, well, actually, you don't even need to remove all of those other laws. I'm just going to personally opt out of them. And that, we believe, would open up a huge amount of economic opportunity for first-time job seekers.
We've become one of the most difficult countries in the world to open up and run a small business. South Africans have just been overwhelmed by red tape absolutely everywhere, from every government department, from every regulatory body. It doesn't matter what business you're in now. It's almost impossible to just run your business and try and employ people and earn a living. You're constantly in a queue or on a website with some inefficient government organization that doesn't care that you exist, that doesn't care that you want to earn a living and pay tax. And for me, this points directly to the ANC's overwhelming need for control and centralization of everything. And every time the ANC makes another policy and another policy adjustment, they create another issue that you have to deal with. And South Africans just don't want to be entrepreneurs anymore. And if they do, they try and fly under the radar.
Well, I mean, I think it's a bit more complex than that. I mean, if you go to downtown Joburg, as I sometimes do, you'll see a lot of people there hustling, trying to make a living. Right? I think people have a desire to improve their circumstances. And really what you want, and I think this goes to your point, you want to get the government out of the way.
Yes.
To enable people to freely and voluntarily exchange.
Just get the hell out of the way. Anytime the government does get out of the way, something amazing happens. That's what happened with the Kwaito music industry in South Africa. And the government just got out of the way. And ever since then, they've tried to tighten control inside the music industry, and a lot of the innovation has disappeared.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing some research on the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture.
Oh, don't get me going. Please don't get me going.
Which I think should be cancelled entirely. Sorry, Gayton McKenzie, but I think your portfolio should be closed down.
Yeah.
But to Gayton's credit, one of the things that he closed down was something called the Downtown Music Academy or Studio.
Yes.
And it was basically like some government boondoggle where they spent something like 89 million rand on like a sound studio downtown Joburg.
Yes.
And I mean, just the enormous wastage, and they were constantly getting like capital injections of 20 million rand here, 20 million rand there. And, you know, your example of Kwaito music, like Kwaito doesn't depend on the government's support. Yes. People like that music, they want to make it, and people want to hear it. And you don't have to do anything to make that happen. It's emergent. It emerges by itself.
The same thing that happened with the healthcare system, where cadres and wealth extraction networks were set up in order to pilfer from healthcare. The Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, let me tell you, is the next frontier. We haven't even started unpacking the problems in those in that place, because it's much less sensational than a hospital where children are sick and people are dying.
Yeah.
But it's been a vehicle for cadre wealth extraction on an absolutely grand scale, and we're going to start seeing stuff in those spaces.
Yeah, and when you give people a portfolio and you say, you know, this is now your domain, they start coming up with things to do, like starting wasteful projects like the downtown music studio. So, and I think this is a very important point around the FMF's philosophy of minimal constitutional government. We want the government's role to be highly constrained and narrow.
Yes.
So it's not necessary for you to have a Department of Sport. I mean, if you look at sports in South Africa, there are various governing bodies. Some of them are more and some of them are less controlled by the government. But something like the Springboks is an institution in and of itself. And it's the product of excellent schools that has a strong rugby culture. And there's a tradition of rugby playing in South Africa that precedes the Department of Sports.
Yes.
And why do people love the Springboks, by the way? Because they win and because they're excellent.
Yes.
And I think they're excellent in spite of the efforts of the sports minister, not because of the efforts of the sports minister. And you can, I mean, it was quite funny when we posted a campaign, some material on social media. We said that we should reduce the number of ministries from 35, I think it is at the moment, to 10.
Yes.
And we said, you know, we need to get rid of the Department of Sports. Some angry commentator on our social media said, you know, this is typical of lazy couch potatoes at the Free Market Foundation who don't believe in the value of sports. Yes. But I think he missed the point. The point is like, you know, you can still have sport in your society. It's a good thing. Yep. People should do it. But
they will flourish. Sports will flourish if the government takes their hands off it.
Yeah, people want to compete. They want to win. They want to enjoy themselves recreationally. So, yeah, it's the same with the arts.
Yes.
In South Africa, we had this big involvement of the state going back to the apartheid era, like big theatres like the Baxter Theatre and various other theatres. But, I mean, those are nice facilities, but they're not dependent on shouldn't be dependent on the government. And often those are the first things that get cut, you know. So I think we just need to be a bit skeptical of politicians' claims to be doing things in the so-called public good, when actually there are a lot of public goods that are privately run and initiated. And those are often the things worth celebrating in our society. And we must just be very careful about ceding control to government authorities, because, like I said earlier, it's very difficult to get it back.
I mean, when I look at sports, South Africa is actually an incredibly united country. And when you listen to statisticians like Franz Cronje and even commentators like Banzai Shongwe, I don't think he wants to talk to me, but when you look at people like that, they have a very, very good grasp of South Africa's social cohesion. And politicians would have us believe that we are this extremely divided country, that we hate each other and that we want to kill each other. And the data does not point to that. South Africans are united, and I'm seeing it increasingly. I first started seeing it with what I call unlikely heroes emerging from sporting spaces. Even like somebody like Caster Semenya, that was quite divisive in certain ways, was one of the first people where the whole country rallied around her and everyone said, don't touch Caster Semenya. Then we had the rise of Sia and Rassie and that relationship, and South Africans just absolutely loved it. People are behind, people are united. And most recently from the Madlanga Commission, we've had Colonel Sanders and General Nkwazi. And when you look at these people of all races, all cultures, all religions, all creeds are out backing these guys, supporting them. Everybody wants the best for them. And yeah, it's about allowing unlikely heroes, to just emerge and come about organically.
But I also think we need to celebrate excellence. And I think that's one of the reasons why people do love the Springboks. And I think there are kind of different debates going on. So people will say, well, look at Siya Kolisi. He's a black guy from the Eastern Cape and he's representing black people on the national stage. Yes. Maybe some people feel that way. But, if you think of somebody like Kolisi, if you think of Cheslin Colby, Ibn Etzebeth,
yes,
regardless of who they are, like they're just world beaters, regardless of the color of their skin, and they could play on any rugby team around the world. And you don't actually need this kind of racial representativity rubric. Does anybody complain that every Bafana soccer player is black? Like, no, it's just they happen to be the best team that we can field, and no one's saying, "Oh, we need an Indian goalkeeper or something." It's
not only do I agree with you, but this is coming from broad society, from pop spaces like music or sport or whatever it is, but it is emerging in the political space now as well, where people are starting to back winners that they can identify with, even if it's not a case where they can identify with them completely. Like we've seen now is in Mfuleni municipality, where people watched the DA pockets around them improve with public resources and public services for 4 years or 8 years, and they eventually decided they wanted a slice of that as well, and they started voting DA. South Africans are ready to back winners. If you have a look at the kind of broad support that Songezo Zibi gets when he's championing in Parliament.
Championing BEE and other ANC policies.
Yeah, look, the bar isn't high. I even use Gayton McKenzie as an example. So the bar is so low for politicians in South Africa that Gayton McKenzie had broad support simply because he was out there and actually doing something. Just to see some degree of excellence.
I would encourage South Africans to start thinking less about politics and more about how they can solve problems in their communities at the local level. Because politicians of all stripes, we've been very critical of the ANC in this conversation.
Yes.
But politicians generally respond to political incentives.
Yes.
And I think something that I've observed in South Africa, you mentioned Rise Mzansi, is that we have a lot of fragmentation in South African politics, a lot of these one-man band kind of parties.
Yes, and more emerging.
Yeah, they kind of, they seem to kind of grow like grass, and then every election there's somebody mows the lawn and they disappear, and then more come up in the next election.
ANC comes out.
Yeah, but that's exactly the point, is that a lot of, there's fragmentation, but there's not much differentiation, particularly in terms of policy. And that's been one of the things that I've worried about a bit with the GNU, is that there's kind of like this left of center consensus and a very state-driven, state-biased kind of approach to politics. Like, if we just vote for the right guys, get the better personnel in, then we'll solve all the problems. But yeah, that's not actually how I think we're going to get out of many of these problems. We actually need to start wresting power away from the state in general, rather than trying to, compete for who controls the state.
Yes.
And this is the point I've been making throughout this conversation, is that actually if you as a South African, if you care about a particular feature of your life, whether it's your safety and security in your suburb, whether it's the vitality and dynamism of your business, whether it's your school institution, whether it's your religious organization, then you need to take responsibility for that. Because if you cede responsibility to somebody else, it's most likely going to be a politician, and they're going to be using those resources, that platform, to further their own ends,
Yes.
their own objectives, and they're going to be interested in wielding power over you in your life. And yes, by all means, engage in the democratic electoral process. I'm not saying that's unimportant, and choose who you vote for carefully. But in many respects with the GNU, many of the people who voted for those opposition parties weren't voting for them to join the national government.
Yes.
They gave their authority to those parties, and then the parties said, well, we're going to join the GNU, and we're going to become cabinet ministers, and we're going to make decisions over your life. So I would understand why some people might be a bit frustrated with that. And if you look really across South Africa, a lot of the problems that we experience are problems of centralization and control. And if you think of crime, for example, in the Western Cape, there's a rampant crime problem in the Cape Flats. And you could say, well, that's not the DA's problem. It's the SAPS, the National Policing, that is responsible for combating and investigating crimes. But that's not really adequate, right? Like those members of the provincial administration of the city of Cape Town and other municipalities, they have a duty to protect the rights and the interests of their constituents.
Yes.
And their constituents might not be very patient with the excuse that, oh, well, it's not our fault, it's Pretoria's fault. And so I think it's very much incumbent on local authorities that value freedom and have that sense of civic responsibility to say, well, actually, we're going to aggressively acquire powers for ourselves. And that might mean that you have to fight it in the courts. But you have a duty of care to your constituents. You have that kind of moral urgency and the moral clarity, I think, to do something like that. And that means maybe setting up your own provincial or municipal police force and saying, like, we're actually going to control this area because you can't. I mean, if you look at the Madlanga Commission, how many senior cops and intelligence operatives are on suspended leave pending investigations at the moment? Like, I think there's credible claim to be made that criminal syndicates have taken over our policing system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know about you, but that fills me with disquiet. But what do you do about that? I think you first of all have to acknowledge the reality that this has happened, that you're on your own, essentially, that the basic obligations of the state to protect life, liberty, and property, never mind doing sports administration and all the other nonsense that they get up to, they have abdicated their responsibility.
Yes.
And in the face of this void of power, like something's going to fill that, right? It's either going to be organized, orderly, structured response, or it's going to be criminal forces, dark forces that are going to fill that void. And so as a freedom-loving South African, you have to choose, like, are you going to let those dark forces enter into your life, or are you going to create boundaries and barriers around the things that you value and the things that you want to protect? And so that doesn't just apply to crime, it applies to everything that we value in our lives, whether it's the future of our children and their education, our healthcare in the face of national health insurance, whether it's economic regulation. You know, you actually got to take the fight to the government, and that's what the Free Market Foundation is committed to doing. And I think business people, peaceful citizens, they don't want to be engaged in conflict.
Yes.
But I always say you have to pick your battles, but every now and then you have to be prepared to go to war. And when people are threatening your vital economic interests, then you are justified in retaliating against that. And there's various ways that you can do that through the courts, through mobilizing civil society, through creating alternative structures. And that creates domains of power and authority that can resist some of these pressures from the center.
I agree with you, and I think that the work that you guys do at the Free Market Foundation is extremely important in that regard. As a final parting comment from me, I'll just say that I believe that big business, for example, and powerful high net worth individuals in South Africa have been very, very happy to just be bullied by the government continue on living their very comfortable lives. And I would have liked to have seen what I call captains of industry and public intellectuals, for that matter of fact, coming out and resisting the state. I would like to see captains of industry come out and say, guys, EWC is not on. We are resisting this now. We're going to fight this in the courts because it's harming our foreign direct investment. We are fighting BEE because it's harming the job market. We can't get the kind of employees that we would like, and we are going to fight this. Instead, you have these sometimes billionaire captains of industry who just bow and swoon to the ANC's demands. So yes, I agree. People like you and I, and just ordinary citizens and small businesses, we obviously have to be out there fighting to take control back from the state, intervening to make our lives better where possible. But if there are captains of industry out there that are listening to this right now, please stop going to your guest lectures at business schools and pretending that everything is fine. And guys, captains of industry from the banking industry who never mention all of these huge issues that they whisper about regarding Reserve Bank and that kind of thing. So if there are people out there, that's my parting shot. And
well, the Free Market Foundation, we say the quiet bit out loud. We call it as it is.
Yeah.
And I think South Africa has a lot of talented people, a lot of entrepreneurial people, but something we lack is clarity and honesty about some of the problems that we face. And I think we need to cultivate more of that and be clear and unambiguous about the things that we will tolerate and the things that we won't tolerate. And there's a lot at stake. There's a very prosperous future that we could have together if we make hard decisions now and acknowledge the trade-offs and recognize reality as well. I think a lot of the problems in South Africa today, the policy-driven ones, are kind of trying to bend reality to some kind of ideological will or some kind of imagined reality. But I think we need to get real in South Africa, and part of that is about saying, what is the actual nature of power in this country? What is it that we can do as individuals to preserve and take back some power for ourselves, and how do we do that at scale, I think is very important. And civil society, I think, really holds a lot of the answers there, not just organizations like the Free Market Foundation. We've mentioned the Institute of Race Relations, Sakeliga is another great organization that's taking the fight against BEE to the courts and preserving economic order. AfriForum is doing incredible work in the Afrikaans community, but we need to see more of these kinds of movements, these kind of organizations from the bottom up, and then we can achieve some really great change in South Africa.
I encourage everybody to have a look at the work you're doing at the Free Market Foundation and now at the Free Speech Union. That'll be...
oh gosh, we didn't even talk about the Free Speech Union.
Well, go ahead. Give us a minute on the Free Speech Union. Give us one minute.
Well, all the things we've spoken about today, freedom depends on your ability to express yourself.
Yes.
And to articulate your ideas and to dissent.
Yes.
Like what we've done in this conversation. Yes. We're a bit worried at the Free Market Foundation that there's been a closing of the space for free expression.
Yes.
Not only domestically, but also internationally. So we have relaunched the Free Speech Union, actually last week, in fact. This was started by Sarah Gon, but it's part of the network of international free speech unions around the world, started by Toby Young in the UK, but now it's spread around to other countries. And really the mission is to advocate for the benefits of free speech.
Yes.
To also act in defense of individuals whose free speech rights might be curtailed. The executive director is Mark Oppenheimer. I'm one of the directors. You should definitely talk to him on your show.
I would love to talk to Mark Oppenheimer. And not only that, but there was a very interesting podcast that was out yesterday or the day before with Gabriel Makin from the Makin Sense podcast. He works under Franz Cronier, the statistician.
Yes, yeah. I was watching it whilst eating my breakfast this morning.
Yeah, please, if you have time. I haven't watched the whole interview. I stopped a little bit short. But if you have time, please find the Gabriel Makin, Mark Oppenheimer podcast. Very interesting. Definitely worth watching.
But yeah, look, maybe you should have Mark on your show.
I will. We will do that.
He's the real expert on free speech and also hate speech and that kind of tension between those things. And he's obviously been hugely significant a figure in terms of developing jurisprudence around South Africa's free speech law. Like if you using a textbook in your law studies around this topic, you're likely to see almost every case Mark is involved in one of those, whether it's the Musuku case or the flag case, the many others. So yeah, I would encourage you to check out the work of the Free Speech Union. We're still in the kind of early stages.
Yes.
But yeah, if you experience your free speech rights being infringed upon, FSU will have an interest in that and will hopefully be able to come to your aid, dependent on resources, of course. But
yes,
if there are people out there who care about defending free speech, then we'd like to get in touch with them to support our cause. But yeah, I think free speech is really the lifeblood of a democracy, of the free exchange of ideas, for academic freedom that we were talking about earlier. And that's really how you get to truth. And I mentioned we need to acknowledge reality. That's part of that contestation of ideas, is how do we actually understand each other, understand the problem at hand? And if you're not free to articulate and to diagnose the problem, I mean, we've seen this in the UK, the political crisis that's developing there, because there are major problems in that society where people are being prevented from even expressing what the problem is.
Yes.
So that can have a really kind of a chilling effect on other freedoms. So that's why we're spending time and resources on protecting that right.
That's really fantastic, and I'm glad that you guys have that up and running. Almost all South Africans would agree that free speech is obviously something that we all want and all want to maintain. This is David Ansara, Ben Matjiu, our executive producer. He's sitting here as well.
I can confirm that Ben is real. He's sitting back there.
His wife's probably looking for him now. And yeah, please have a look at the Free Speech Union and the Free Market Foundation. Check out Mark Oppenheimer and his interviews. And I'm looking forward to engaging with you more in the future. Thank you so much for joining us here today. You've been an amazing guest. You've been very forthcoming and honest. And we really appreciate your time.
Yeah, Aidan, thank you very much to you and Ben. It's been a fantastic conversation. And yeah, I'll keep going with the show. I think it's a space where really interesting conversations can be had. And we need more of that in South Africa.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully we'll get more followers than just my mom. I'm Aidan Brown. This is the Main Stage Podcast. Bye for now.